Welcome to Tools to Understanding Funding Landscapes in Africa, sponsored by the Africa Grantmakers Affinity Group in cooperation with the Foundation Center. My name is Niamani Mutima, Executive Director of the Africa Grantmakers Affinity Group, and I'd like to welcome our speakers and our audience to today's webinar. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. The audience will be able to ask questions and post it in the chat box for the speakers throughout the presentations, and we'll take the questions at the end. If you have a question for a specific speaker, please note that when you're posting your question. So we're going to get started, and I want to first introduce our speakers. We have Amanda Dillon and Nina Sporer, both of the Foundation Center, and Hafisa Rashid of the King Baudouin Foundation, U.S. You can read more about their bios on our website at www.africagrantmakers.org, where the notice of the webinar is posted. So let's get started. Let me first start with Amanda. Amanda, let's start this discussion about tools for understanding the funding landscapes in Africa, talking about the Equal Footing website. So Equal Footing focuses on 3 countries, Burundi, DRC, and Rwanda. So how did this partnership between the King Baudouin Foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and the Foundation come about? And why this type of tool, and what types of information does it provide?
Thanks, Niamani, and thanks for having us here today. So I should say that, a little while ago, Bloomberg Philanthropies, they convened a summit with a group of stakeholders who were already investing and working in Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Burundi. And that group consisted of funders, NGOs, corporations, and government officials. So they convened because they wanted to strengthen their work and their effectiveness, and if possible, they wanted to create a comprehensive and collaborative plan that would ensure that women's economic and political citizenship in these 3 countries was guaranteed. So, after 2 full days together, it became very clear that they couldn't find any type of comprehensive solution. And in fact, instead of finding answers, they came up with several questions. So some of these questions were like, where's funding going? Who's investing in these countries? What kinds of approaches are being used for women and their families and their communities? And, which of those approaches has been working? And at the end, the group concluded that what they really needed was to find more data on what was happening, and frankly, that data was hard to find. So fast forward to last year, Bloomberg Philanthropies and the King Baudouin Foundation partnered with Foundation Center to create Equal Footing. And the goal of Equal Footing would be essentially to provide that widely sought after data and information, give those answers and solutions that were so elusive, and do it in a free and accessible way. So for those already investing and working in this region, and also for those who may be interested in doing so. And more specifically, the goals were to discover and share who and what funders support in the region, curating a collection of social sector research that, has been conducted by foundations and NGOs about what works in economic development, specifically with a focus on women. And then finally, to create case studies and how-to materials on effective ways of funding. So you asked, Equal Footing currently includes data about philanthropic funding across all issues in these 3 countries, such as health, education, and community development, but it also more specifically highlights economic development approaches focused on women.
Okay, so with that background, let's take a look at the Equal Footing webinar. Can you give us a quick overview so that the audience can get a flavor of how to use it?
Thanks, Niamani. So what you're seeing on screen is the Equal Footing homepage, and this can be publicly accessed by going to equal-footing.org. This data portal was designed to help a few different audience types. It was designed to be used by entities funding programs and initiatives in these three countries and other post-conflict and peace-building countries like them. It was also designed for NGOs and partners looking for sources of funding. And it can also be used and was designed for government officials and agencies to better understand the civil society landscape. So if I scroll down the homepage, you can see the top three questions we heard across these different audiences. So the first being, where is funding going? Who is investing in these countries? And acknowledging that investing in women brings change, but wondering, what works. So one of the most common questions we hear is, if I want to begin funding one of these countries, who are the other funders already working there, and can I find out a little bit more about them? So I'm going to click funders here at the top. And on this page, we see the top 25 funders across all issue areas. And as you can see, there's quite a variety. There's some corporate funders, some non-U.S. based funders, some family foundations, and more. This list can be sorted, so we're looking at the top funders for just one of these countries. So I'm going to just click on Rwanda. And next to their name, we can see the total number of grants they've made and dollars they've given since 2006. So we can see the MacArthur Foundation has given 42 grants totaling close to $15 million to Rwanda since 2006. And to pull up even more information, we can click their name and find out basic contact information, financial data, mission statement, background, and more details on their grant-making program. So this is a really great start for getting a sense of some of the big players. But say your foundation needs more information about who and what are these other foundations supporting practice funding map that was built on the Foundation Map platform. And with this project, we were really able to enhance the platform in a few new ways. So in this view, we can see Burundi, DRC, and Rwanda are highlighted. The four boxes at the top of the map provide aggregate summaries about information like total number of grants, so 2,407, total dollar value of grants, close to 800 million, total number of funders, and total number of recipients. So almost 300 funders giving to these three countries since 2006. And the shading of the countries also functions like a heat map. So the darker the color, the more funding going there. You can also click on a country to drill down and find out more details or to see those four funding boxes for that place in particular. You can also select a country from the location drop-down here at the top. And this map is currently showing area served data. So let me switch views to recipients. So you can see that there's 365 grants being made by 45 funders to 136 recipients based in Rwanda. And that totals $19 million about. However, if I switch to area served, meaning funding going to recipients anywhere in the world and working in Rwanda, we can see that, wow, funding went up almost by 10 times. So this is a really useful tool to get a better understanding of how much funding is going to recipients based in these countries and how much funding is going to organizations that are working in these countries. So if we click on the list view, we can learn even more about the nature of any of these organizations' work. So you can look at the list by foundation, by recipient, by grant, and by related research. So research related to work going on in Rwanda. And if we wanted to look more closely at any foundation grant making or grants received, we can go and click the details icon here on the right, and this will pull up a list of grants. And if we want to drill down even further, we can click the detail icon again, and this will show us really substantive information. So we can see that Bloomberg Philanthropies made a grant in 2015 to Library for All to support a pilot for a digital library for the developing world. And if you can see, Foundation Center adds code to let you know what population is being served, what kind of support strategy is being employed. So for those looking for potential partners, let's look over here to Constellations. This was another huge enhancement to the platform that was made possible by this project. And I'm going to zoom in, and hopefully it's not lagging too much so you can see what's going on. But essentially what you're looking at is a hub-and-spoke view of the universe of funding in Rwanda. The purple bubbles represent recipients, and the blue bubbles represent foundations. And the size of the bubble represents total funding. And the lines between the bubbles represent funding relationships. So you can quickly see who is related to who is funding an organization that you're funding, or who may be working off on their own. This information can be filtered by location, by subject area, by population served, and by other filters. So you can really target the type of information you're looking for. So the last thing I'm going to show you is how to find more context so you can make better sense of what all the data means. So in addition to information on grant makers and their partners and the grants, Equal Footing also has a wealth of qualitative data. And to access that, I'm going to scroll up and click on Approaches. So the Approaches section of the site presents related research, case studies, infographics, and sample grants that illustrate how philanthropy is supporting economic development through women in these countries or other post-conflict regions of the world. These 7 approaches reflect the types of activities for which we commonly see philanthropic support for women in these countries. So let's look more closely at vocational training. So if I scroll down, the first thing that I see is a key finding that's been pulled from one of the over 120 reports on the website. And if you're curious to find out more about where this came from, you can click here, and this will take you straight to the report, where you'll find a link to download the report, a summary of the report, and the rest of the key findings. So you can quickly make a decision about whether this is the resource you're looking for or not. And if I keep scrolling down, on each of the approaches pages, you will find a case study related to that. You'll find sample grant information and related research and reports from the social sector. And this is from a largely untapped body of research. And then you can find different stats related to the work in these areas or in these countries. So these types of resources exist for each of the 7 interventions. And if you don't want to search by approach and instead you want to look at all of, say, the reports at once, you can click up here at Reports and scroll, and you will see all of the reports on Equal Footing. And likewise, if you want to see all the impact stories, so case studies and infographics, you can access that from the top menu as well. So this is really only scratching the surface of showing what's available on Equal Footing and how funders use it to scan the landscape, how they can understand better who the key players are, who they may be able to partner with, and how they can gain a better understanding of the context.
Well, Amanda, this is a great tool, and I encourage everyone to spend some time exploring it. So can you talk a bit about how frequently it will be updated in terms of funding data and resources, and how funders make sure that their information is included?
Sure. So we have, as I showed you, both quantitative data like grants, and we also have qualitative data like the reports and the case studies. And so the grants data get added to the map every week. Foundation Center compiles data from a number of sources, including direct reporting of grants by over 1,100 foundations. We also collect it from the IRS, tax returns. We also look at foundation websites and other public sources, and I think in all, actually, Foundation Center's staff monitors more than 35 diverse information sources to verify all of the details that you can find in our databases. And if you are a funder in one of these countries and you don't see your information, I would be happy to work with you to get that information on the map or on equal footing. So following this webinar, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is ajd@foundationcenter.org, and you can be a part of our eGrant reporting program. And then as for the reports and case studies and infographics, we're planning on adding a new case study or infographic about every month, and we will add relevant reports as we find them. So if you're a funder interested in elevating your story and your work, please let me know so we can capture your lessons learned through a case study or infographic. And similarly, if you have a report or other related resource to share, we'd be happy to add it to the collection.
Thanks, Amanda. So just a reminder to our audience that we'll be taking questions a bit later. But you can ask them at any point by typing them into the chat box. So now I want to turn to Hafisa. Hafisa, you work with the King Baudouin Foundation based in the U.S. The King Baudouin Foundation based in Belgium was one of the partners that launched Equal Footing with the Foundation Center and Bloomberg Philanthropies. So can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between the King Baudouin Foundation and the King Baudouin Foundation United States, and how King Baudouin Foundation US works with donors and organizations in Burundi, DRC, and Rwanda, and how the Equal Footing website is a helpful tool in your work?
Thanks, Niamani. As you mentioned, KBF is a Belgium-based nonprofit. It's a leading independent foundation in Europe that was established in 1976, and it supports programs, pan-European programs throughout the continent in the Balkans and as well as Central Africa. So King Baudouin Foundation US is the American daughter of KBF. We were established in 2002 as an independent public charity, and our services and programs can be best summarized in 3 ways. 1, we're a facilitator. 2, we're a convener, and 3, we're a connector. So first, KBF US facilitates gifts from US-based donors to overseas nonprofits in Europe and Africa. 2, we convene programs for European cultural institutions and African public and private universities to learn how to adopt best practices of fundraising for their local context. And 3, we connect both donors and nonprofits to resources and information, which is a great lead-in, that final component as a connector, because that's where Equal Footing comes in. So we both work with donors and grant recipient organizations, and in my work I'm often asked from both parties for easier ways to learn information about the other. So Equal Footing enables both donors and grant recipients to learn about each other through a free platform. And most of the questions center around, 1, what is the past and current funding, who are former and potential partners, and of course through the curation of reports, which Amanda mentioned earlier, what has worked in the past and what is working now. So for KBF US as an intermediary, we work to flatten the landscape so that information is easier to obtain, dissect, and use, and that's exactly what Equal Footing does. But people don't have to go through us. They can use that information on their own.
Great. So in your work with donors and NGOs seeking funding, what type of alignment or differences do you see between what NGOs are seeking funding to support and what donors are interested in funding? And how does the Equal Footing website help to inform both about the interests of the other?
So I think donors and NGOs are often asking the same questions, but just from different perspectives. So I like to think of KBF US as a kind of matchmaker, playing a translator between both parties. When either a donor or an NGO approaches us to learn about who's working in a particular space or which funders are supporting a particular project, we listen to the criteria and do our best to present attractive suitors, basically, attractive donors or NGOs that might be potential collaborators. So equal footing is a kind of matchmaker in itself, which provides both donor and NGO the resources to better customize your questions and identify more targeted answers. How I see the website in informing both the interest of the other, since it kind of collapses all the information in one umbrella, it's easier for an NGO to see both their perspective of what they're looking in, but also see from the donor perspective as well, so they're better able to anticipate the kind of questions they may receive in the future.
Great. Now, AGAG promotes responsive philanthropy to benefit African communities. Hafisa, and based upon your experience, how can this type of tool help to inform people's understanding about what's happening in these countries?
Well, for one thing, just to reiterate, Equal Footing focuses on DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi. And for those of us that follow the news, the situation, particularly in Burundi, is dynamic, changing, and not always for the better, of course. So Equal Footing enables one to see who is working on the ground and can provide local contacts, personnel, resources, whatever you can think of that to ensure that your project is sustainable and able to keep working. In DRC, Rwanda, and particularly in Burundi, understanding and navigating the political climate is crucial to continuing one's work. So where Equal Footing comes in is able to highlight who are the partners that are working in the short term and the long term, and who can provide useful information for new partners entering the field.
Great. Thank you, Hafisa. So we're going to circle back to both you and Amanda after our next speaker. And just a reminder to an audience that we'll take questions a bit later, but you can ask them at any point by typing them into the chat box. So, Nina, I want to turn to you now to talk a little bit about a similar type of mapping tool, but this one helps us to understand the funding landscapes in early childhood development in countries in East and Southern Africa. So what prompted the partnership between the Foundation Center and Bernard Van Leer to develop this mapping tool, and what types of information does it provide?
Great question, Niamani, and thank you for inviting me to speak to everyone about this resource today. Bernard Van Leer Foundation first started thinking about a way to coordinate funding during a meeting a few years ago in Tanzania. At the table was a coalition of funders that invest in young children's development in the region. This group was tackling hard questions that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, like how can we avoid duplicating investments in some areas while other areas get overlooked and underfunded? And how do we identify potential synergies and opportunities to collaborate with others who have similar interests and align our investments for greater impact? And also, how do we encourage folks outside of this group to support this work and increase overall funding for early childhood development? By coordinating their efforts, the group felt that they could address these challenges. Of course, coordinating investments is easier than it sounds. First and foremost, they needed clear information on who was funding what and where. That's where Foundation Center came in. We had a lot of the foundation data on hand, and with our research, technology, and data analysis expertise, we were the clear partner to shed light on funding to this area and bring the information to life through our interactive mapping platform called Foundation Maps. This map is part of a larger suite of services we offer here at Foundation Center. It includes issue-based maps, research reports, and landscapes like Equal Footing, and like another one that recently launched on the Sustainable Development Goals. So thanks to funding from foundations like Bloomberg, King Badwin Foundation, Bernard Van Leer Foundation, and others, we're able to curate and make sense of all this information so that the field can have access to it in one place for smarter grant making. So back to Bernard Van Leer, they wanted an integrated information hub that includes not only foundation funding, but also contextual information and information on bilateral and multilateral aid flows to guide and inform the group's strategy. They wanted to support something that would not only serve their foundation, but that could increase transparency and serve others working in this field. The map we developed shows who is funding specific areas of early childhood development in 16 East and South African countries. Bernard Van Leer funds in Uganda and Tanzania, so they chose those two countries as well as 14 others in the surrounding area for this initial mapping. Working with an advisory group of ECD experts and drawing from a number of existing frameworks by Brookings Institution, the World Health Organization, UNESCO, UNICEF, and others, we developed a taxonomy which organizes that data on the map into 8 ECD categories so that users can easily filter and make sense of the funding data. The 8 categories range from child and maternal health to early education and child and protection and policy. This allows users to see how much funding has gone to a particular slice of ECD in each country. The map offers information on 265 funders funding more than $2.8 billion, as well as more than $13.5 billion in bilateral and multilateral aid for early childhood development from 2008 to the present. It provides access to foundation grant and disbursement details and can be overlaid with 3 country-level indicators, which are mortality for children under 5 years old, prevalence of undernourishment, and GDP per capita. We envision that the map will be used by funders, NGOs, policymakers, and others working on ECD so that they can understand what their peers are doing, see their work within a broader context, identify gaps in funding, prepare foundation funding and bilateral and multilateral aid, develop funding strategies, and find partners for collaboration. So that in a nutshell is the information users can glean from the map, Imani.
That's great. So can you give us a quick overview so that the audience can get a flavor of how to use it?
Yes, I would love to. So this is the landing page for Foundation Maps for Early Childhood Development in East Africa. And this map is publicly available, so anyone can access it at ecdfunding.org. So hitting Explore the Map in the right will take you directly to the map. And the first thing that pops up is a how-to video that explains how you can go about using the map. So as you'll notice, on the left, there's 2 options for viewing the data. There's a map view, and there's also a list view. And the filter options available are the 16 countries that I mentioned in East and South Africa, as well as the 8 ECD categories that were developed with a group of experts. So we have categories like water, sanitation, and hygiene, nutrition, diseases and research, and so on. And for any of these categories, if you want to access definitions or just have other related questions about the map, you can click on the FAQs in the top right corner. We also have more filters available, which are the years and filtering by keyword. Now you'll notice that there are 4 summary boxes at the top, and these show the full funding data that we have available on this map. So the 2 on the left show the foundation data. We have over 2,000 foundation grants, and those are totaling over $2.8 billion in foundation funding. And then on the right, we have close to 18,000 disbursements by bilaterals and multilaterals, and that is totaling over $13.5 billion. And then here in the left, we have the indicator options that I mentioned before. you'll notice that the bubbles on the map are yellow and green. So the large yellow bubbles represent the bilateral, multilateral aid coming in. And the green bubbles represent the foundation funding. So right away you can tell that a lot more government aid is coming in than foundation aid, understandably. And then the blue shading underneath that represents the one of the 3 indicators that have been selected. There's also a legend at the bottom, and so clicking on that will give you a sense of what the different shades of blue represent. So I'm just going to switch to the mortality rate indicator here, and you'll see that the darker the blue, the higher the mortality rate for children under 5. So let me just zoom in so we get a better. So you'll notice right away that there are some countries that are pretty light blue. Let's click on those to take a look. We have Tanzania with a relatively low mortality rate, as well as Botswana, also fairly low for the region. And then looking at the very dark blue ones, those have the highest mortality rate. So here we're looking at Somalia and also South Sudan. So, not very surprising considering recent conflicts and wars in those areas. But then if you're curious to see how much funding, overall funding, has gone to ECD, you can click on the bubbles and look at the numbers here. So Somalia, it looks like they've gotten close to 900,000 from foundations and 500 million from governments. Not very much, it looks like. And then compare that with countries like Tanzania, and they're getting 66 million from foundations and over 1.3 billion from governments. So that's just a very kind of quick way to use the map to identify gaps in funding. Now, let's say your foundation is spearheading a new initiative to improve early childhood education in East Africa. What you can do is look up early education. I'm going to scroll up, and you can either type it in or hit Browse Subjects. And so now we've selected that filter, and you can see how much each country has already received. So let's zoom in again and click on some of these countries to see how much they're getting for early education. So again, Somalia, it looks pretty small, $50,000. Ethiopia has close to $10 million for early education. And then lastly, I'll just click on Kenya. So they're getting over 28 million. So in this looks like Kenya is really getting the most of the funding. And if you're interested in any particular country here and want to kind of zoom in and get more details, you can click on See Details. And you can pull up a list of funders to see who else is working in this space to potentially contact them for more information. So clicking on the Foundations tab here, you'll get a list of who's been funding early education in the area. We have folks like Packard Foundation, Oak, King Badawin, Nike Foundation, and so on. And you can also click on their name to pull up a profile. So here we have contact information, background, as well as a list of their grants. And just clicking over one to the right, the Recipients tab. So here we're able to see who the NGOs are that are working in this area. So in some cases we have local NGOs working on the ground based in Ethiopia, based in Kenya, and then we also have ones in the US and in Europe who are doing work there as well. And then we can look at individual grant details. So this will give you a sense of what exactly folks are funding on the ground. And for example, this grant is from Packard Foundation to the UN, a 3-year grant of $1.5 million for a community-based approach to keeping girls in school in Ethiopia. And then finally, we have a list of the government aid coming in, so you can see which country, which government is giving aid, and what year it was made and how much. And then again, we have the ability to click on the disbursement details here and really get a sense of what it was for. So that's just a very quick overview of how you can use the map. And in this way, you can identify potential partners or grantees and also scan the landscape of early childhood funding in this area. So let me just stop there.
This is another great tool, Nina, with some really rich data, and I encourage everyone to spend some time exploring it. So this data includes multi and bilateral funding in addition to foundation funding. So how frequently is it updated, and how can funders make sure their information is included?
Well, in order to answer your question, Yamani, I'd like to start by explaining the source of the data on the map. So data for the ECD funding map comes from foundations databases, which are compiled through direct reporting of grants data by foundations, from IRS and other government forms, from foundation websites, and from other public sources. And through additional outreach efforts, we're also able to encourage foundations funding the ECD field to provide their data for inclusion on the map. Data on bilateral multilateral aid comes from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and the indicators on the map originate from the World Bank's data catalog. So the foundation's funding data on the map is updated weekly, whereas the bilateral and multilateral data will be updated yearly when OECD makes new data available. Foundations that wish to submit grants data to Foundation Center for Inclusion on this map and in other Foundation Center knowledge services are encouraged to join our electronic reporting program. E-reporting allows foundations to submit their grants data to us either using their existing grants management software through an easy export option. We have 16 software providers who partner with us to make this option available to their clients, or to simply fill out our Excel spreadsheet template with the information and email it back to us. We'll then load your data into our databases, code it to one or more of the ECD categories, and incorporate it into the map. If you'd like to become an e-reporter or have questions about the program, you can email me directly at ns@foundationcenter.org or email me Amani, who can direct your email to me. Making sure your foundation's work is represented on the map is an important step to making this information more useful for the entire field. The second step is for everyone to use the map and let us know about their experience. We've already heard from folks that they're interested in seeing this expanded to include all of Africa. We also have the ability to integrate evaluation reports and case studies, as you saw with the Equal Footing website, if we hear there's a strong need for this. So dream big. If there are any improvements you'd like to see, additional data you'd like included, or questions that you have, we welcome your feedback and comments. Again, you can email me with feedback at ns@foundationcenter.org. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Yamani.
Thanks, Nina. So there's no debate that we live in an era of big data. And what's great about technology is that it helps us to gain access to the type of data we've been talking about, mapping funding. But before we turn to the questions from the audience, I'd like each of the speakers to comment on how these mapping tools can complement other sources of information that funders have and use to inform their grant making. Amanda, let's start with you. Your thoughts?
So I think that, these tools are really great for doing some especially early investigative work and research related to exploring or doing especially early investigative work and research related to exploring a new area of funding, or perhaps when you're thinking about changing strategic directions or pursuing a new direction. I also think that they're very useful for verifying assumptions that you may have about who's funding what and where. And I also think that this type of information can complement just getting out there really and talking to other funders that you may discover using these tools. I think they can also complement events and conferences where you can connect with other funders, like the ones that the African Grantmakers Affinity Group puts on. So I think it's a good tool to have in your toolbox among many.
Great, thanks. Hafisa, how about you? How do you think these mapping tools can complement the other sources of information that funders, including the King Baudouin Foundation U.S., uses to inform the grant making of donors?
I think in addition to all of us have attended conferences, entered partnerships, joined affinity groups like AGOG and elsewhere, This is a great tool to just complement the resource and information sharing. The era of working in silos is over as donors and NGOs. So we all have experienced the kind of transformation online platforms like Google in flattening barriers to information has affected the way we consume news and conduct business and the way that we work. And so philanthropy must keep up with the times. And the mapping research tools of Equal Foundation keeps both donors and NGOs ahead of the curve.
Great. And Nina, how do you think that these mapping tools can complement other sources of information that funders have and use to inform their grant making?
Sure. So I completely agree with what Amanda and Hafiza both said. And I think that the data in the ECD map, it's being constantly added to and updated, and the map can serve as a go-to resource for scanning the landscape, identifying gaps in funding, and finding potential partners for your work. That said, this map shows funding that's already happened in the past, and it doesn't give you a picture of a funder's intentions for the future. So in that sense, it doesn't really replace talking to other funders, to NGOs working on the ground, or to the populations you're looking to positively impact with your funding. So I think the map is a great way to start your research in order to figure out who is working in the space and who to talk to in the first place. But it's meant to be used in tandem with other strategies for informing your grant making, such as talking to people in the field, first-hand observations and site visits, and reading reports and evaluations.
Great. So now let's turn to some of the questions that our audience have entered into the chat box. So Amanda, let's start with a question that's directed to you. How did the Foundation Center tease out giving from U.S. donors to U.S.-based foundations for work in these countries? And that is not cross-border giving, but giving within the U.S. for international work.
Thanks, Imani. Yeah, so as I was, showing the brief demo of a little bit earlier, we, with this project, were able to distinguish on Foundation maps grants that are going to a particular country, even if the recipient who's working in that country is not located there. So, for example, you can see nonprofit that is based in Washington, D.C., you can see the grant that's being given to them for work in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, actually in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And this was done in a number of ways. Sometimes the foundations will report this data to us directly, and that's actually the best way possible, and we encourage foundations to do that when at all possible. Other times we will derive that information from looking at the grant description. And other times we will look at actually where the recipient typically works, and we will derive that information from that source.
Great. Now for Nina, is there a floor on foundations, that is foundations that give less than a certain amount? Are they not included?
That's a great question, Yamani. So for the ECD map, there is no floor. So we have some grants that are very small, and those all appear in the map. There's also no cap, so it can be pretty much any grant size, and it will appear in the map. We're also actually working on building in the functionality to allow grants where the amount is unknown or unspecified to be included in the map as well. There were some foundations whose data we have, but who weren't able to specify the grant amounts for whatever reason, and so we're actually trying to get their data in there as well. And primarily, we find value in this because people, can still look up this information, have it at their fingertips, and find partners for collaboration in this way, even if they don't know the precise grant amount. There's still value in just knowing that a specific funder made a grant to a specific organization and what it was for.
Great. And a question for both you, Amanda and Nina. Are the funders included in the database only those funders based in the U.S., or does it also include funders based outside of the United States? Let's start with you, Amanda.
So we include funders from all over the world in the mapping platform, and we have that information in our database as well. Most people know Foundation Center for collecting grants data from U.S. tax forms, but actually more and more these days we are collecting foundation data from the foundations themselves, electronically reporting it through the program that Nina described. And we're also working with more affinity groups to work with their members, who often are international foundations and grant makers. So it's actually getting to be more and more international every day.
Great. And
yes, and the same is true for the ECD funding map. It includes grant making from foundations based all over the world, focused on Eastern and Southern Africa. And as Amanda said, these kinds of special projects like Equal Footing and the ECD funding map really allow us to broaden the data set and just involve as many funders from all over the world as possible. We try to encourage everyone to submit their data. So if there's any funders out there who don't see their data on the map or they don't see all of it, then please feel free to reach out to us so that we can make sure to get it included.
Great. And Hafisa, a question for you about how the organizations based in countries that are covered by these the equal footing mapping in Burundi, DRC, and Congo, how do they connect to the King Baudouin Foundation U.S. to get assistance in terms of the matchmaking services that KBF U.S. provides?
So KBF U.S. facilitates gifts from U.S.-based donors to overseas nonprofits throughout Europe, throughout Africa, and in particular to your question, of course, DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi. We have currently supporting local partners in those countries, particularly ADISCO, which is a Burundi-based organization. So we use Equal Footing to inform potential donors what are the local actors that are working in the area right now as they think through what their philanthropic goals are for whatever subject area that they would like to work in.
Great. So we're just about out of time. So I want to turn to the speakers for any closing comments. Amanda, let's start with you.
Thank you, Niamani. I wanted to thank everyone who attended the webinar. I also want to thank you, Niamani, and the African Grantmakers Affinity Group so much for hosting us. We're so proud to have worked on Equal Footing with such strong partners like Bloomberg Philanthropies and the King Baudouin Foundation. And I think that for everyone who's on the webinar and who's interested in learning how to do their philanthropy better and smarter, I just want to say that that is also what Foundation Center is really striving to help funders do, and especially those who are investing in Africa with projects like these. As we mentioned, they're freely accessible so that funders here in the United States can use them, so partners abroad can use them. And with limited resources, it's just so important that we all use tools and information that we have at our disposal in the most effective manner. So as always, if you have any feedback for us as to how we can improve these tools and provide any new types of information, please do not hesitate to contact us.
Great, thank you. Hafisa, any closing comments?
To echo Amanda, yes, thank you very much, Niamani and the African Grantmakers Affinity Group for putting together this webinar, of course, with Foundation Center. KBF US is proud to be associated with this project. We think every effort to remove barriers to information, create further avenues of collaboration between donors and NGOs is a win. So we look forward to working with both sides of the same coin and facilitating gifts to Europe and Africa. Thank you.
Great. And Nina, closing comments.
Sure. For us, launching the ECD funding map with the invaluable partnership of Bernard Van Leer Foundation is only the starting point. We're eager to put the map into the hands of those who will use it. We're also committed to enhancing the map to meet the needs of ECD stakeholders, and with your help, we can make this an even more valuable resource. So I encourage everyone to check out the map. You can see the link on your screen, ecdfunding.org, and send me your feedback at ns@foundationcenter.org, and also share your foundation's grants data so we can get it included on the map if it's not already there. So thanks so much, everyone, and a big thank you to Niamani for co-hosting and for organizing today's webinar.
So I'd like to thank our speakers, Amanda Dillon, Anina Spora of the Foundation Center, and Hafisa Rashid of the King Baudouin Foundation US for joining this discussion about these two new mapping tools that provide a wealth of information about funding landscapes in Africa. Equal Footing, that focuses on a range of areas in Burundi, DRC, and Rwanda, and Mapping Early Childhood Development in East and Southern Africa, that captures foundation, bilateral, and multilateral funding in these countries. So we encourage you to check out the resources links that you see on your screen. We also encourage you to visit our website at www.africagrantmakers.org to learn more about our work to promote robust, effective, and responsive philanthropy to benefit African communities. You can join our mailing list to receive our newsletter and announcements. And also bookmark the Foundation Center. It's a great resource for both grant makers and grant seekers who are interested in learning more about funding